Welcome to our regular board meeting, Grande Prairie District Catholic Schools, November 22nd. We're going to begin with an opening prayer, and we'll ask Steve Gobert to lead us in the opening prayer, please.
Thank you. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Be with us during this meeting, God. Help us to open our hearts and our minds to you, so that we may hear your word and feel your desire of your work. Let us not be daunted by the challenges we face, but rather let us search out our meaning and our purpose of our work. Guide us in our recognition and respect of the many gifts and talents that are presented here today. We ask this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
And we will continue with our Treaty 8 recognition. Grande Prairie and District Catholic Schools acknowledge that Treaty 8 territory on which we stand is the ancestral land of the Indigenous peoples, the Cree, the Dene, the Beaver, and is common home to everyone in virtue of God, our Creator's greatest gift. We will move to the adoption of the agenda.
That the board approve the minutes. Oh, sorry, in the minutes we were on? Minutes. That the Board of Trustees approve the agenda as presented or amended.
Any discussion? Minutes? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes? Carries. Minutes of the special board meeting? It's passed, okay?
Just adopted the agenda.
Okay.
Now
Yeah, okay. So we move into the approval of the minutes, or the, sorry, the adoption of the agenda. Oh, okay,
the adoption of the minutes.
We-
We're now approving the minutes from November.
okay. We have a motion. Yes, Michelle?
That the board approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on November 1st, 2021 as presented.
All in favor? Okay. Let's move into, that approval has been accepted.
And now we're approving the minutes of the organization.
Okay. Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, board chair, report governance, 3.1, upcoming events. Upcoming events, we don't have any immediately this month. We do have the poinsettias, which will be coming out, and we'll ask them to be taken to the schools for Advent, as it will be something that we start this coming Sunday. And we'll ask the trustees of their respective schools to take poinsettias. They will be coming here to CEC, and you can come and get them from here. And we're going to encourage you. Most of the Advent celebrations will be virtual, I'm presuming, but we would encourage you to watch your particular schools online with them, just to kind of support their work. (3.2) CCSTA 2022 AHM meeting coming up June 1st to the 4th. That's going to be in Ontario, Blue Mountain, and it's out of province travel right now. We're not sure. They are hoping for it to be live, but it might be virtual, so we just don't know. Just wondering if any trustees might be interested in going at this point, you don't have to decide right now, but if you're interested, you can put your name forward. John, I'll put your name down as an interested person. Okay. And Michael?
Not on that, but on the calendar, there's gonna be quite a bit there. Like, there's also, that's the Canadian Catholic, right?
Right.
So there's also gonna be the Canadian School Board Association. That'll happen. Do we have those dates yet?
We don't have those, but like, to add to what you're saying, we also have ACSDA's, those are other ones that are in provincial, but this one is out of province, yes.
And then there's also the one in March in Anaheim.
Yeah, although that one might be virtual. I guess now.
That's different.
That's ACSD and that's in April or May. Yeah. So.
Maybe just so that the trustees know that once they're in for one, then they're not.
That's it for the year. For your per diem is listed up front there.
Yeah, but it's not it for the year. There's just certain ones in the policy that allow it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the reason that this is on the agenda for this meeting is because they're just kind of taking a survey to see who might be interested. I just opened it up here. They want to know by November 30th, which kind of indicates that they might not be completely sure what they're hosting, whether it's
This
going to
makes
be in
sense.
person or online. So they have a date of November 30th where they're conducting who's going to be interested, how long do you think you're going to stay? So I believe they're feeling this out as well. So I think that's why it's on the agenda so early.
Thank you. Okay. Administrative reports. Board chair governance, upcoming events and CCS that we've done. So now we're going information, 3.3 faith report, and I believe we have Laura here.
Mr. Chair, could we ask Laura to maybe take Krista's mic?
Oh,
for this
yes,
presentation?
Phone can't see my face. Okay. All right. I'm okay. Okay, so again, it's very nice to see you. Those of you that are new and returning, it's great to be back in person. I did submit the faith report, so that should have been in your package, and I'll just go over a few of the highlights in there. So we had our commissioning mass. It was wonderful. We did have to stay within the regulations as set by each of the parishes. So our teachers and staff did pre-register to attend, and unfortunately, because of the restrictions, it did prevent us all from being there like we would be in the past, but it was still nonetheless wonderful to be recommissioned by our parish pastors. Sacrament registration was online once again this year, and so we've had over 300 students register to receive either the sacrament of Eucharist, reconciliation, or confirmation. And we are getting the last little trickles of people who didn't meet that date, but we're definitely open to all who need to register. And we will be giving PD to our teachers that are new in grades 2, 3, and 6 on how to supply the sacramental prep program to our students. Grade 8. So for those of you that are new, this is the last year of the implementation of a new religious ed program called Growing in Faith, Growing in Christ. And so we initially implemented it into grade 1 and 2 7 years ago. And with each grade year, we've rolled up a grade. So we have concluded that this year with our grade 8. This is a fantastic program that has been developed with the bishops of Alberta, Northwest Territories, and Ontario, and other professional educators across Alberta. And cannot say enough about it. Teachers did get a PD in implementing this grade 8 program, and the feedback so far has been wonderful. So I'd encourage you, you can, if you are in a school and talking to some teachers, just to talk to them about it, and it's a wonderful program. Bible celebration. So in grade 4 in our district, we host Bible celebrations across the district, and we gift all of our grade 4 students with a Bible. And so those celebrations are underway. Bibles have been delivered, and we're excited for our students to receive those. And then we had Catholic Education Sunday, which was a great success. In our district, we had different activities and lessons that preceded the Sunday. So in that week leading up to it, we had teachers and students engaging in different activities, including the novena for Catholic education. And then lastly, we have our Remembrance Day services that were held throughout the district. And while they were virtual, they were still a wonderful and moving part of our school day. Oh, any questions?
Thank you for your very good work. We appreciate what you do for our district.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much, Laura. 2.4, our annual education results report. Jessie, would you speak to that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just as a bit of a side note, to thank you to Laura, you know, and back in February 2020, when COVID first set in and we weren't sure what we were doing, and we were going online, and then we were in person, and then we were doing some sort of a hybrid. It seems that under Laura's leadership, our faith education never missed a beat. So thank you to Laura for that. Yeah. Our AERR, which stands for Alberta Education Results Report. This is a mandate that comes to us from Alberta Education each fall. And then each spring, we have an assurance proposal that our district develops to kind of say, is what we were trying to do, did we meet that goal? So there is data lacking from provincial sources just due to COVID. So our color chart maybe doesn't look as full as usual. Let's just have a quick look at that here. So this chart here is usually nice and colored up for us. Oh, here it is. And so we can see that there's a lot of NAs, which means that data is not available. Things have kind of been put on hold in terms of some of the provincial mandates. But we do, in a local context, have in this report, reports from faith, literacy, learning supports, which sometimes we call inclusive education, and early learning. In addition, when we look at what have we done locally, we did pilot both the numeracy and the literacy assessments that addressed some of the learning disruptions that we had due to COVID. Interventions for literacy have already begun, and our comprehensive literacy approach already addresses much of the supports that students need. We do a lot of word work already, so those assessments, we kind of understood them when they came in. And after Christmas, Christy and I will sit down with Rochelle McDonald, who will join us after Christmas break as our numeracy lead. And we will then discuss the numeracy assessments that we will be putting forth to students. So that's pretty much, it's a long document. Anyone have any questions about that? All right, well, thank you very much. And again, we'll talk about this document a lot more and see how it pertains to the assurance model that we put forth as a district in the spring. So we'll see lots of this document.
Thank you. Let's move on to information on schools. Again, I'll turn that over
Okay.
to Jessie.
This is just something that I wanted to put in this report just to kind of introduce our schools to the Board of Trustees. A very brief presentation, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. It's always helpful because as a board, you plan our future schools. And we look at changes in population both within the school and within certain areas of the city. We have specialty programs that we offer in our schools, and we often look at those. We look at the amount of students involved, what the trajectories are, and if those programs continue to be sustainable. Our population in Grand Prairie in general, and as well as the school district, is stabilizing, which is really something that hasn't happened for a long, long time. We've been in constant kind of grow mode and in constant new teacher mode. So we are starting to see a sense of stabilization, which is actually a good thing. So we're looking forward to that. And we hope that this little document, which we can certainly add to and talk about more, makes future planning more predictable and somewhat easier for the Board of Trustees as they look at the 2 new buildings that we're currently have going on in the city, and as well as utilizing buildings. So it's just there for your information purposes, and over time, I'll certainly answer any questions that you may have.
Could you tell me, what's the provincial, they're asking on utilization?
I mean, what is our goal for utilization?
That's 100%, 85%.
It used to be 85. Chelsea, is it still?
Yes.
85%, Mr. Krogan? We'll go back to that.
It's
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Anybody else?
Any other questions then? Okay, thank you. Jessie?
Just
sorry.
for everybody to remember to turn your mic on, just so that people at home can hear what we're saying.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle.
Sorry.
3.6, we have 2 schools that we're looking at, and maybe I'll ask Jessie to kind of give us an updated status of that, and maybe what as a board we need to kind of decide and look ahead to.
So this is going to be one of your main decisions moving forward as a Board of Trustees. So the little document that you just saw is kind of an insight into all schools. So with the decision to make O'Brien Lake West the single track immersion facility, essentially that site will become the new St. Gerard. So this leaves us with 2 facilities within the same area that need to be filled. Neither area, either the St. Patrick area or the existing St. Gerard, sees great growth in student population. So we have to be creative and figure out how we're going to best utilize those 2 buildings. St. Patrick's School is going to be a beautiful facility. I'm very excited about that, but it will be larger than the original building. So if the old St. Gerard, I think it held, and I'm just guessing here, like approximately anywhere between 250 and 300 students, the new facility will hold 450 students. So we want to figure out either through boundaries or programming or some sort of creative solution, how to make that school full and vibrant. And of course, then the second facility to consider is the existing St. Gerard building. This building has recently underwent a modernization, and it's also scheduled to have some of the modulars removed. So once we know what the exact number for that facility is, we'll let you know, and then we can start having conversations around what is the best utilization for that facility. So we will continue. This will now start to be brought back over and over. You'll see some presentations from the admin at central office. We welcome your questions, but every decision we make to fill buildings or to offer programming or to move programming also has an effect on usually boundaries, often busing and transportation. So we have to work through all those pieces before you put forth a solid idea of what we're going to do with those.
Comments, questions, Michael?
Reading between the lines. Oh, my mic. Don't talk, I'm always talking. Reading between the lines, between St. Patrick's and St. Gerard's, we have one too many buildings at this present time. And so decisions were made on the previous board onto what we were going to do, and we had presentations given to us about, you know, St. Patrick's, and I know the board wasn't, you know, at that time wasn't all for it, but what are we gonna do if we have one too many buildings now?
Well, first of all, Michael, the decision was made, and the decision that we make going forward, no decision will be, well, that's a clear-cut image. It makes perfect sense. It's 100% go. A decision was made, and it was a good decision, and it was a solid decision. But now we need to consider how to be creative with the other two buildings. So I don't know if we have one too many buildings, as much as we do need to house immersion. I think we just need to be creative with what we're doing. We have other schools, as Mr. Crokin mentioned, in our capacity list that are busting at the seams. So is there a way to, you know, juggle things around so that our students have good facilities, but they're not overcrowded? So those are the kind of puzzle pieces that we'll continue to bring to this table.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, through the chair.
One further, Mr. Chair. Is there any, and I'm just new on this, but is there any room for maybe expansion of the gym to have a community gym at St. Pat's would help with utilization? Like we do at St. Teresa's.
No, there is not, Mr. Crokin. Those plans are done. But the gym will be full size, be far bigger than the existing gym. So, yeah, it will be a big, expensive, beautiful facility, but the floor plan has been signed off.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just on the south end, I'm just thinking about it because we'll have St. Gerard's, Kitiri, St. Pat's, and potentially Mother Teresa, all within 68th Ave. And we don't feel like that's too much. I know everything's already ground broken and whatever, but we don't feel like that's too much for that area, or?
Well, you know, that's the thing, Jeremiah, it is what it is now. Those sites are set. They've been signed off by Alberta Education. However, I can tell you that the O'Brien Lake West School will be chock full. We're already talking about if we move that entire population over there, that there won't be a foods lab, and there probably won't be a music room because there'll already be classrooms. Kateri is reaching being too full, as is Mother Teresa. So in a way, it's kind of nice if we have two facilities to fill, that they're surrounded by buildings that are too full. Now, I'm not going to tell you that's the answer, because that answer lies with the Board of Trustees, but we'll be able to take a much closer look at the utilization and capacity of those buildings as we start to try and fill and open St.
Okay, so we
Pat's
won't be
and
like
St. Gerard.
taking any away from central, like St. Clement's areas or anything like that?
I wouldn't think so, because busing, of course, is always a factor and an expense. But right now, because you are the current board, everything is on the table to examine.
I also think some of the things to consider too, coming up, we have an area in northern Alberta where there's a lot of capacity for new technology and industry to move in. We have nautical gas, we have a northern petrochemical carbon neutral company coming in, where the prediction within 4 years that Grand Prairie would be 100,000 people. We are looking at potentially expanding into an area at the regional college, which is polytechnical kind of opportunity. So, you know, the opportunity for us to look at a STEM school comes involved in that. Our superintendent indicated we might look at boundaries when we do this. So I think it's important that we look at lots of opportunities for see where we want our future students to go in terms of look at our advocacy plan, creativity, innovation, research. We could be one of the leaders in that direction. So I think there's an opportunity for us to really consider what we're doing for our young people with the models of schools. Now, part of that, I'm hoping we make some decisions fairly soon, because the buildings are in the ground. We have an opportunity to kind of look with the tenders out there and see what we can put into the buildings that can help meet our needs as well as what the designs of the schools are. So, any other comments? So it'll be some good discussions for us to have. Okay. By-election for Ward 3. Maybe Chelsea?
Sorry, got behind in my agenda. Okay, so this is just a little bit of an update for everyone. I know there has been a little bit of chatter about Ward 3. We did not receive nomination papers for a candidate in Ward 3, which is our Fairview and surrounding area. So we are being encouraged by the education minister, well, all boards that have any sort of vacancy are being encouraged by the education minister to hold a by-election. So basically what that means is we go through the same process again, except it's only for Ward 3. We would start by selecting the date of our by-election, working backwards 4 weeks to nomination day, and then nomination day, the nomination period, sorry, needs to be at least 2 weeks long. So you'll see later in the agenda that we have brought forward a recommendation of when you could potentially have the by-election and the nomination day. Of course, that's up for discussion for what you guys feel would be best. I think other than that, we've just given a little bit more background about what the Education Act and stuff requires in the background information, and I'll take questions if there is any.
Thank you for getting that process underway. Parent survey coming up. Oh, sorry, Michael, I missed that.
That's right. So we never received any nomination papers for any candidates for the original election. So after, if the board chooses to pass the motion as recommended tonight, the nomination period will open up and close on nomination day for Ward 3 as of pending recommendation. Could be tomorrow, it could open up, so.
Thank you, Chad. My error. Continue on with the audited financial statement then, and I'll turn that over to you again, Justin. Or- No, this would be Chelsea.
Oops. Sorry, I'm just gonna bring the presentation up.
Okay.
No, that's okay. It's just not going.
That's not yours? Oh. No, mine's not. Our audited financial statement presentation. Sorry, I didn't have my mic on. On November 17th, the audit committee met. And we had our audit committee meeting, which the auditor was present at to present. So I'm just going to do a summary of the audited financial statements for the rest of the group tonight, or I guess the entire group. So Alberta Education receives copies of our financial reporting documentation, and for each division in the province of Alberta. They do their own internal assessments and reviews in addition to having external auditors come in and audit the school divisions. And then there is a combined statement under Alberta Ed, which all school jurisdictions are included in. So you can find this information posted on the Alberta Ed website. It takes a while because it's not until after their review that school jurisdictions financial statements actually go up on their website, but you can go look at history for all divisions in all of the province. You can find it there, and then you can find their combined statements as well. So Alberta Education releases guidelines each year from the Financial Reporting and Accountability Branch. So it contains information for school authorities, including submission of financial reporting documentation, key messages and changes for the year, audited financial statements, schedules, and suggested notes. Various appendices, including sample notes, as mentioned, guidance on program reporting, capital asset reporting, etc. So it's the school authority's responsibility to ensure that we're following the Education Act and any related regulations to ensure that the independent auditor is registered with the CPA Alberta and qualified to perform an insurance engagement under the CPA Act. So we haven't had a change in in our auditors in the past couple of years, so we are good on that front. Okay, so the division hires an independent external auditor through an RFP process, which follows our Alberta procurement laws. Financial statements belong to the division, but there is included an independent auditor's report within the financial statements. So this is prepared and issued by the audit firm. The management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. And the auditor's responsibility is to express an opinion on the financial statements based on the audit work conducted. The report itself includes an explanation of what the audit involves. So the opinion in the draft financial statements is unqualified or unmodified, which is basically what is considered a clean audit opinion. And that's ultimately our goal. So sometimes there could be a modified opinion that just draws attention to a specific item in the statements, but doesn't necessarily mean that the audit isn't clean. Okay, so the first statement that I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail is the statement of financial position. So if you're following along with your attachment in your agenda, you can look at page 5 of the draft financial statements.
Because I know these numbers are very small to read on here. So if you want to see the numbers in detail, you might want to open up your financial statements and follow along with those. So cash increased by 3.5 million. In 2020, it decreased by 3.4 million, mainly due to this year's increase is mainly due to a decrease in portfolio investments. Our portfolio investments decreased by approximately 4 million this year. If you want to see further details on the cash, you can see the cash flow statement for a detailed summary of other impacts on cash. Our portfolio investments, the reason that they went down is rates with our usual investment company have been less than desirable during the year. For a majority of the year, the rates the funds were better off in our regular bank account than reinvesting into GICs. So that's kind of the reason for the change there, the flip between portfolio investments and cash. So as we had GICs maturing, rather than roll them into less favorable rated GICs, we were just leaving them in the bank account. Subsequent to year end, we did open up another investment account with an alternative firm and have reinvested some funds at better rates. Accounts payable decreased by 2.2 million. Last year, it increased by 2.6 million, mostly due to significant invoices near end for O&M projects that we had underway. So the 2020 summer was really busy for our maintenance department. Not that every summer isn't, but the spring before that, we had some additional funds put in through CMR funding. The government was looking to kind of jumpstart some economic resources and asked for school board interest in what we could do with those funds. So that's why we had a little bit more going on in the 2020 summer. So our normal, this year's payables balance of 4.6 million consists mostly of vendor payables. It also consists of that $1.9 million in unrecognized revenue related to the WMA funding calculation. If anybody recalls that, that news kind of came to us, or didn't kind of, it came to a surprise to all divisions just about a week before year end. So those are our highlighted items. Sorry, I guess I should have said before I kind of started going through. I'm basically going to look at items that of higher value change as we go through. And then I do have a few notes on some of the smaller ones, but I didn't want to go through every single line item or we would be here for a very long time. So if you do have questions about something I'm not going to touch on, feel free to type up and ask them as we go through so that you don't forget by the end of my presentation. So I will also mention our AR decreased by 441,000. So mostly this consists of amounts due from municipalities for property taxes, GST refunds, and then just other general accounts receivable. Unspent deferred contributions, including operating and capital funds. So this would be anything that falls under IMR, CMR, potentially new school furniture and equipment budgets. So those increased by 616,000 from 2021. So if you want further details on the unspent deferred contributions, you can look at Schedule 2 in the financial statements. So continuing on in the statement of financial position, we'll go down to the non-financial assets and net assets. So you'll hear them referred to as TCAs, they're tangible capital assets. So they increased by approximately 12.3 million this year. Most of this is attributable to work completed to date for Alberta infrastructure managed projects. So this is newer replacement schools. So for us, that would be our O'Brien Lake School and the St. Patrick's School, as well as capital projects funded by the board, projects funded through IMR or through CMR. And you can find additional details on our tangible capital assets on Schedule 6, which is page 16. Our accumulated surplus, I had one other item on here before I went into accumulated surplus. Our spent deferred capital contributions, this also increased by approximately 12 million. So we can go into further discussion on our statements and kind of break this down for you guys at another session, but basically this is the net of our supported additions, less amortization on supported tangible capital assets. So I'll give you guys a little bit more information on different items on the statements like this at a future learning session for everybody. Our accumulated surplus increased by our 2021 operating surplus, which was 275,000. So that is 0.4% of our 2021 budget, is what we ended up as a surplus. And our surplus will go into discussing our accumulated surplus in a little bit more detail when I get down to the portion on Schedule 1, where we talk about our operating and capital reserves. Okay, so we'll move on to our statement of operations, which is on page 6. So first we'll talk about revenues. So we had an overall increase of approximately 1.6 million. Government of Alberta increase was 2.5 million. Fees and various other revenues decreased by approximately 900,000. So the Alberta education increase over prior year mostly results from the Safe Return to Class funding, which in 2021 we received 1.9 million. As well, we didn't experience reductions. So when you look in our financial statements, we always have the comparative year there, the 2020 year. So that would be in March of 2020 when the pandemic started. So in that year, there was a reduction to funding, both to base instructional funding and transportation funding from the government when students were out of school for that period. So when you're looking at the comparative, we got more this year, more in 2021 for that Safe Return to Class fund. And then the 2020 numbers would have been lower than normal because of those reductions back when the pandemic first started. So fees and other revenues also saw a further decrease this year over 2020. This is due to activity restrictions resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. And our property taxes, this was an insignificant change just due to a slight change in mill rates. Just to note, property taxes don't follow the calendar year. So our property taxes are always reporting on 1/3 of the previous calendar year and 2/3 of the current calendar year. Expenses by program. So expenses by program. So normally when we talk about the first two lines, we have instruction pre-K and then instruction K to grade 12. So usually we combine those and just discuss about instruction in general. So instruction includes funded pre-K and K to 12. It increased by 2.3 million. A portion of this was for additional learning supports for students and operation of online learning programs. So these are items that the division chose to fund through their Safe Return to Class fund. And then the prior year experienced an overall reduction as support staff was reduced and students were not in buildings after the pandemic began in 2020. So on the revenue side, how I was mentioning, we got our instructional and transportation funding reduced for those 3 months. We also saw a reduce in our expenses in those areas. Our PO&M, so our operations and maintenance, or I call it PO&M lots. Operations and maintenance, the majority of this increase is due to changes in custodial staffing and supplies. So additional items being needed, hand sanitizer, masks, those types of things, as well as additional cleaning supplies needed in relation to the pandemic. And a portion of this was funded through the Safe Return to Class funding as well. Transportation services were run for the entire school year versus 2020 when they shut down at the end of March. So this is reflected in the comparatives. Other information that I was going to touch on briefly, board and sysadmin. We had a slight increase from the 2020 year end, and external services had a slight decrease. As the community pre-K students, we didn't reflect revenue for them for 2020. Okay, so this is a separate schedule and is very tiny on my screen. It's a little bit easier to read, but still pretty tiny if you look in the actual statement. So this is Schedule 3. It is the schedule of program operations. It's basically what we just went through, but broken down into even more detail. So it gives you a summary of your revenues by type or source, and then your expenses by object. And then if you look in the columns, it's reported by those programs that we just went through. So instruction, operations and maintenance, transportation, and sysadmin and external services. So this gives you a little bit more detailed breakdown. I just want to mention, I get this question a lot about the revenues from Alberta Education mostly. So in the Alberta Education guidelines that come out with our audited financial statement template, it notes that where funding isn't expressly directed towards specific programs or outcomes, revenues may be allocated to the program for which the funds were spent at the discretion of the school jurisdiction. So there are, like the operations and maintenance grant is a targeted grant. You can't spend less than your allocation in there, but you can spend more, whereas the rest of them are more freely to flow money between them. So they're not necessarily targeted grants. Gives the school jurisdiction discretion to put the revenues where they think they're needed. Okay, so we'll go on to the accumulated surplus and reserves. So this can be found on page 10 and 11 if you're following along. So I'm going to go a little bit backwards and work in the columns from right to left. So we'll start with the capital reserves. So these represent the portion of the accumulated surplus that is designated for future board-funded tangible capital asset acquisitions. At the end of the year, we had 3.3 million in this reserve. So capital reserves can only be discharged through the purchase of board-funded tangible capital assets. Any other use, including transfers to unrestricted surplus or operating reserves, requires approval from the Minister of Education. In the next column, we have our operating reserves, which represent funds designated for specific purposes by the board, generally as recommended by management. And this includes our school-generated funds as well. Our operating reserves at August 31st were 4.5 million. And I just want you guys to keep in mind that this does all tie. I do have a summary of the reserves later in the presentation, but these numbers include all those transfers that were approved at the previous meeting on November 1st. So then we have our unrestricted surplus in our third column from the right. So our unrestricted surplus is the portion of accumulated surplus that is unencumbered by the district as at year end. So at the end of the year, it was 2.7 million, a decrease from 2020 of 231,000. So just a little bit about unrestricted surplus with going out into a whole lot of detail. So basically, we have this unrestricted surplus for several purposes. We want to support effective planning, which includes risk mitigation strategies. Divisions need to consider a reasonable amount of unrestricted operating surplus to carry. Boards may require emergency funds from time to time or need contingency funds available for unexpected increases in expenses or decreases in anticipated revenues. So when this occurs, boards need to have access to enough funds to continue to provide educational services and daily operations of the division. So this could include like running our payroll, processing our payables, those types of things in emergent situations. In addition, it also allows boards to plan for future years carrying an accumulated surplus balance. Several years ago, the School Board Officials Association did a review and they made a recommendation for unrestricted surplus of a minimum of at least 2.5% of budget, which they kind of came up with a basis that was about 5 operational day equivalencies using that. So based on that, our minimum based on their recommendation, sorry, would be 1.7 million. So it's good to see that we're hitting that minimum threshold. I do want to note that that recommendation hasn't been updated in recent years. So it doesn't account for anything like annual inflation, any relations to the ongoing pandemic, anything like that. So I would guess that if there was a recommendation to come forward in future years, that number would probably even be a higher recommendation than currently sits there. Endowment funds, we don't have anything in there currently, but these are funds held for the benefit of third parties for specific purposes as stipulated by the donor. So generally the principal cannot be expended, but income earned on the principal would be used for a specific purpose as directed by the donor. Next column is our investment in tangible capital assets. So this balance is composed of the cost of board funded tangible capital assets. So you'll hear us talk about supported and unsupported, and it actually gets a little bit confusing. Supported means it's directly supported through Alberta Education or Alberta Infrastructure.
Unsupported technically means it's board funded. So lots of times things that we purchase through our capital reserves or through the unrestricted surplus, those types of things. And so if we kind of go through all of the changes in those and add them up, we come to our net assets. So totaling the previous columns that I went through will give us our net asset total. So we had a $242,000 increase in our reserves at the end of the year. We had a $231,000 decrease to unrestricted surplus and a $264,000 increase to our investment in tangible capital assets, giving us our overall $275,000 increase in net assets, which is equivalent to our operating surplus for 2021. The second page of this schedule just gives a breakdown of operating and capital reserves by program. So the first one is school and instructional. So you'll see for each different program area, it gives the operating and the capital reserves. You can see the opening balances changes throughout the year and then our ending balances. So if you went through and totaled up all your operating reserve columns in here and you flip back to the previous page, that would total your total operating reserves, and then same thing for your capital reserves. So this just demonstrates the amount spent from previous reserve allocations as well as transfers to reserve as approved at the previous board meeting. The schedule shows both operating and capital reserve balances by program, so instruction, operations and maintenance, sysadmin, etc. So this is our board plan for reserves. So this should look fairly similar to the document that we looked at last meeting when we approved the reserves, except now this has the transfers in there, so you can see them in the allocation column. And then we've updated the bottom there to reflect our total net assets and all those that were previously shown on the schedule that we just looked at. There is some other items in the financial statements that aren't highlighted. Well, I guess not in the highlighted schedules that I went through. There are some other schedules as noted. We didn't go in detail through the tangible capital assets or the deferred contributions. Feel free to look through those. Come back if you would like questions answered about how it all kind of works. But just a few other items that I wanted to touch on is we also have notes to the financial statements. So lots of times I feel like people look at the financial statements and they kind of stop at the end of the schedules and they don't bother with the notes. So the notes to the financial statements are there to assist different types of users to interpret specific data. So they do form a portion of the audited financial statements. The auditors do go through the notes and audit them with different procedures as well. The notes are there because they contain a summary of specific accounting policies and can give you additional information about how some of the figures have been calculated. So that's the point of the notes to the financial statements. They also have, if you're curious about our accounting policies, there's summaries in there about how everything should be treated in our financial statements. We also have a couple unaudited schedules, which are included. So they are presented for financial statement user reference, but they aren't audited, which means our auditors do not, their audit report does not reflect these schedules. They're listed as unaudited, and usually those are noted in the independent auditor's report. So this is something that comes down from guidance from Alberta Ed. It comes in the template. It's information that they like to use internally, I believe. And so it's presented there for all users to see. So that seems like it was very exciting for everybody. Hopefully I didn't lose you all. I'll take questions.
Questions? Mr. Roy?
Yes. Yes. No, that was just a change in presentation. So you can see there's a comparative figure up in the top. There's a 60,000. Yeah, that's what that is. So the insurance consortium had good year, I guess I could say. Don't want to knock, knock on wood. The rest of the members will be holding their breath. So we just had a little bit of a good year, so there's a little bit of surplus sitting in there, which then is reflected proportionately in what we pay for insurance premiums. And they like to keep a base there because it is its own consortium, so for risk purposes. Yeah, yes. Yeah, so that could go down, should the consortium choose to apply a portion of surplus to the next year's premiums or something like that. So that number can fluctuate depending on the outcome of how that.
Any other comments, questions? No? Okay, thank you, Chelsea. Had a request for a 5-minute break, so stop.
After my presentation?
Thank you.
Find some cash now.
Thank you.